Chapter 100 The Stalk Before the Pounce. Summary. Both groups settle into position to strike. The Trellin won't know what hit them. They shuffled through oversized vents as quickly as Uravity and Pinky could move. If it was just her and Chargebolt, Mei was sure they'd breeze through this part of the plan. But they weren't alone, and she sure as Nezu wasn't going to leave them behind. Not this time. She would be with them until they were sure of their movements. Still, she supposed that the people who say slow and steady wins the race weren't completely crazy. Below her, through slatted grates, was a control center. From their approximate location in the base, Mei didn't think it would be whatever passed as a central command in this falling apart piece of junk. But it could very well be the communications center. Something that would need to be hooked into the base's central network to have the capacity to communicate off-planet. Mei raised a hand in halt, lowering her face closer to the opening. Soft golden glow mixed with Chargebolt's sunflower yellow as she put her quirk to good use. As one would expect from something that acted as a pit stop for ships soaring through space, the communication hub was certainly not empty, though perhaps not as close to capacity as it normally would have been. The late timing, the commotion the boys had caused, coupled with the fact that they hadn't seen any ships in the quadrant before they'd approached, meant this wasn't exactly a primary location to be. When she sat back up, Mei raised 3 fingers. She received 3 swift nods in return before the hero students moved into position around the opening. Her pocket baby would be noticed long before they cut through this time, so she shifted back to give Mina enough room to rest bare palms over the grate. Some of the viscous liquid dripped through the slits, falling to the floor with sizzling splatters. Nothing concerning enough for those in the room below to sound the alarm, but interesting enough to draw focus. The sloughs of melted metal that soon followed, puddling against the ground in an acidic heap, was not the same story. But the ones springing to their feet below were not fast enough. The quiet pop of Mei's silenced pistol followed the shadowed darkness that enveloped the room, what remained of the lights clattering to the ground like pebbles. Pinky slipped out the opening with fluid grace, not pausing upon reaching the ground, instead keying on to the sentient closest to the faintly glowing computer panel. Gravity followed, gravity's hold already shed, as when her feet pushed against the ground, it was only to change trajectory towards the flabby sentient running for the door. Chargebolt dropped straight down, landing in a crouch amongst melted metal. When he raised his head to meet the eyes of their last sentient, they glowed a crackling yellow. Mei couldn't contain her cackle, listening as it echoed through the vents. As naturally as walking, Mei slipped from the vent. Her 3 companions were already gathering the unconscious forms of their 3 victims by the vent opening. She slips her arms under the mossy sentient Chargebolt had carried before tilting her head towards the computer, ready for the taking. "Oh, yeah," Chargebolt murmurs in surprise, leaving her to drag the limp body to Uravity. Pinky was already back in the vents, helping to maneuver the floating body into its confines. They'd come back for them once the rest of the Trellin were dealt with. Couldn't leave behind unconscious bodies for people to find and piece together what was happening. Better to leave them with a dark, empty room to wonder about. "Good news," said Mei's voice over the comms. "We've made it to the server room. You're a go to start hunting." Izuku felt his mouth turn up into a smile that had too many teeth for the ones following them to be comfortable with. The sentients following them had been slowing as the chase went on, the gravity of the planet weighing them down. Though given the Trellin had probably chosen these guards with that in mind, it couldn't just be that. They hadn't even been going for half an hour, and their pursuers were showing signs of exhaustion, despite him and Dynamite slowing to match their pace. If he were to bet, Izuku would peg this as a "Terrans are weird" thing, rather than the guards being just that out of shape. And just like so many other odd aspects of their species, this was working out in their favor. They'd wanted to tire the rather sizable following before they had to take them out, to reduce the likelihood of injuries or resistance, and in that aspect, they certainly succeeded. When Izuku looks towards Dynamite, bright red eyes are looking back at him with a predatory glee. "Ready?" Izuku asks. "Oh." The explosive blonde grins sharply. "I was fucking born ready." And with that, Izuku focuses back on the path ahead, shedding his guise of exhaustion and advancing into the darkness. The two of them don't go far, now silent footsteps stopping only just out of sight of their pursuers. Izuku leads the way to a vantage point high up, with just enough winding trunks and vine-like leaves to provide cover, yet still see the group. "Where'd they go?" The sentient at the front of the pack, a woman with a wolf-like snout but bug-like limbs, calls. "I can't even hear them running anymore," says a smaller sentient with mousy ears from their perch on a bulky one's shoulder. A cyan-scaled man sighs, running a hand through his gray mane. "It's probably for the best. I think we scared them off well enough, and many of our number were running out of energy to chase them much longer." The speed at which they disappeared just then. A sentient with long braided hair trailing down their dappled skin trails. "I haven't seen any species have that kind of energy after such a chase, except for—" "Don't even joke about that, Trusla," the cyan sentient snaps. "I know your people aren't a superstitious bunch, but you know how mine feel about testing the spirits." "I'm not joking," the long-haired sentient says, a slightly hysterical note in their voice as they run long fingers across delicate braids. "Either they hail from a planet with gravity many times that of this one, or they're a species of persistence hunters." The cyan sentient winces as the others pale. "Spirits hope you're not correct, for if you are, I don't see any of us making it out of this apparent trap alive." Izuku blinks. The way they were talking about persistence hunters made the gears in his head spin. They were right about humans being a species built on persistence hunting. Their ancestors didn't have the kind of weaponry or quirks they did now, so the best they could do sometimes was chase something until it got so tired it laid down and died. It was humanity's tenacity that led them to dominate the planet. Was this not normal for sentient species? The wolf-snouted sentient scoffs. "Who cares how long those two meat lumps can run? We'll take them down as soon as they show their skin-bag faces." The woman moves forward, ready to advance the direction he and Dynamite had disappeared to. Black Whip unfurls from Izuku's arms, snagging around a silently protesting blonde's waist and carrying them slightly deeper into the forest. It was time for the hunter to become the hunted. "I'm in," Mei grinned above her laptop, currently connected to the wall of large servers encasing the sides of the room. "Chargebolt, come here and watch. Maybe next time you'll be good enough to handle this." Denki left his place at Ochako's side, crouching down by Mei in a way that still let him see the door. Ochako fingered her staff, still collapsed by her back but ready to bring out at a moment's notice. And while the long weapon wouldn't be nearly as effective as usual in these cordoned-off halls, with no room to really swing her staff and build up momentum, she knew she might be relying on it more than initially planned. Floating the entire ship had taken a lot out of her. Despite how much she'd grown in strength over the months working long hours in construction sites, that had still been too much. There were just so many things in the ship to float. Every wire that wound through the walls and under the floor, every little plant and knick-knack they'd picked up along their travels, every part of their home she'd wrapped in the embrace of her quirk to help them land on the planet unseen, and it had taken more than she'd thought. Unlike in the past, unlike back at UA, her lack of readily accessible quirk would not be the end of her usefulness. No, even if she ran out of stamina to float even her staff, she could still swing it like no one's business. And there was no such thing as a low blow when facing traffickers. "It's too bad this place is so bare bones," Mei sighed. They don't even have their doors hooked up to any network. Just good old-fashioned electronic locks. So, no locking doors like the building is possessed, but I can take down the central power like planned. Mina bounced on the balls of her feet. With the new suit upgrades, this should be more than enough to get our eldritch spook on. Slipping her staff out of its holster, Ochako extended it to its full glory with a smile that was becoming much more commonplace the longer she stayed in space. You ready to kick some trafficker ass, Pinky? Mina's own face mirrored hers, if not slightly less feral. You can bet I am, Urabity.